Welcome to Todd Talk. Today I'm going to tell you about my 10 favorite TV shows of all time.
Todd Talk is brought to you by Sport Boys. Play to win.
So I'm going to start this off with some caveats and some disclaimers. I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm one of those people where you're like, hey, have you seen this? And I'm like, I haven't. And you know, I get it. There's a lot of great TV out there. And I know there's some great TV shows that I haven't seen. And I probably really would like some of them. But here's the thing. One, TV takes a lot of time. One of the worst things I've run into in the last couple of years is when you get into a TV show and then they cancel it. And like Netflix is notorious for this. But a lot of the other streaming services do it too. And there's really no excuse anymore. It's not like you only have so many time slots on your network TV where you have to have a certain number of shows. If you think it's a good show, see it through. There's a couple of them on my top 10 that got canceled early, and it's super frustrating. The other thing is something I've just kind of identified in myself, and that is that I don't like watching people be crappy to each other. There are so many shows that are critically renowned, like, for example, Breaking Bad. I just don't want to watch it. The Wire? It's one of the best shows ever made. I have no interest. And yeah, the writing is great and the acting is great and it's well produced, but it's a story about people being crappy to each other. And I just feel like I can just watch the news if I want to see that. If I'm going to sit through a story that's more than a couple of hours long, I want it to kind of take me out of all this. So one thing you'll notice as we go through my top 10 is that many of them have a supernatural element. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't being crappy to each other. There's always an antagonist and a protagonist. That's just how stories work. But when there's something that is beyond our control, something out of the ordinary and not of this world, that makes the story much, much more interesting. It's not us versus ourselves. It's us versus this thing. And for whatever reason, I just find that way more engaging and compelling in storytelling. Now, here's the other thing. This is not a definitive top 10 best TV shows ever. This is really meant mostly as a demonstration of my taste and what I like. Because I don't like a lot of stuff that other people like. And there's a lot of really great stuff out there that I just haven't interacted with. So this is much more just about what I get jazzed about. And without further ado, number 10, Ted Lasso. Now, nothing really going on supernatural at all in this show, but it was a really great story, really great characters, and I think it was the kind of optimism that the world needed at that time. I don't think any of us have actually lived Ted Lasso's story of being an American moving to England to coach a football team, but I think all of us have sort of lived that story in one way or another. Whether it's the fish out of water or the personal growth or the going through hard times, there are so many relatable things that happen in this show, and it's just really fantastic. The other thing is it was only 3 seasons, and I love that. They had a plan. Here's how it's going to go. We're going to wrap it up. It's going to have an ending, and it's going to be fantastic. And it was. There are so many stories that networks will just drag out for whatever reason, and that's just such a bummer. And the opposite is when they have a plan and then the network cuts it early. Which brings us to number 9, Firefly. Firefly was a network television show. It was on for 1 season and they canceled it. And this show had such a loyal and ravenous fan base that after the show was canceled, they ended up making a movie to kind of wrap up the story. Like, it had enough momentum that they were like, this show that got canceled, we're going to bother to put a bow on this. And the movie was a fantastic conclusion to this series. I would have loved to have seen more of those characters and more of those stories, but as it stands, it is a fantastic 14 episodes. Number 8, Rick and Morty. Now, Rick and Morty is still on the air, and it is in a really weird space right now. Now, one thing about shows that run long or that are still running is they have the opportunity to get bad. And that has happened on numerous occasions. There have been shows that have been fantastic, and then the last couple of episodes were not very good. And recently, with the controversy around Justin Roiland and them firing the voice of Rick and Morty and still having a couple seasons that they are contractually obligated to do, It might be great, it might be terrible. But so far, it has been fantastic. It is a dumb little premise with really, really smart episodes. And when I say smart, I mean smart like South Park is smart. Rick and Morty takes pop culture and armchair philosophy and cuts it open and puts it on display in ways that nobody really ever thought we would or should. And it's super, super fun. Number 7, The Haunting of Hill House. Now, this show had a beginning, it had a planned end, and it ran its course. It's a really cool story. It's kind of sad. It's kind of spooky. It has a really, really satisfying ending. I just loved it. And Mike Flanagan is such a fantastic horror director. I pretty much like everything that he's ever done, and he just did such a good job with this series. There's a couple of the episodes, like the one where they're in the funeral home, where there's these really long shots and this really kind of dreamy going from now to flashbacks kind of cinematography. It's really fantastic. The other thing this show is famous for is there are ghosts hiding in the background of all of these scenes, and it's really fun once you start to spot them, and it makes you kind of want to watch it over again just for that. Yeah, it was really good. Loved it. Number 6, American Horror Story. I don't know if the last couple seasons kind of hold up to how it started off, but the show was so subversive. It would do things that other shows just were not doing. And not only as far as scares and gore and horrible things like that, but they were getting into weird relationships and S&M stuff and just some really, really bizarre subject matter. What's really charming about this show is each season is kind of a self-contained story, but a lot of the actors were the same from season to season, and so they would play different roles, different characters, like an ensemble cast putting on a different play each season. And some of the seasons did have some connections, but they were kind of their own stories. And so if you didn't love one season, you might love next season. And there was a lot of really good ones. Other thing I loved about this show is once you got to the end of the season, there was no way you could have predicted at the beginning that you would have ended up there. They start off with kind of a premise, and then it would get so wild and off the rails. It was just a really fun ride. Number 5 is Severance. Like Rick and Morty, this is a current show. It's only one season in, but it was a fantastic season. It's a really cool premise, really great characters, really bizarre, and just super fun and engaging to watch. I know after the strike, they're supposed to come back with another season, and I have such high hopes. I just got done watching the first season of Silo, and I really wanted to like it, and I really didn't. The first episode is a fantastic setup. It's a really cool world, and there's some interesting stuff going on, and there's this really, really sad end that's super compelling and gets you engaged. But when we got to the end of the season, it was just about people being crappy to each other. Really didn't matter if it happened in the silo or if it happened in Los Angeles. It was just a story about people just being awful to each other. Now, the thing I really like about Severance is it's not people being lousy to us, it's this system being lousy to us. It's kind of like in the movie 2001. It was kind of about us versus it, rather than us versus each other. And I really like that, where it's us trying to overcome something bigger than what we are, rather than us just trying to overcome our greed and jealousy and violent tendencies. Fingers crossed for season 2. Number 4, the OA. What a weird, weird show. The way you're just kind of dropped into the middle of this story really, really grabs you. And this character is so unlike anything else. The kind of woo-woo concepts and ideas are just really bizarre and different than anything I'd ever seen. And you really want to like this character, but you don't know if you can completely trust them. The end of season 1 was really good, and it really made you want a season 2. And then when we got it, it totally delivered on what we had hoped. And the thing that was so awesome about season 2 is the world expanded so much more. There was so much more to think about and understand about this weird world that these characters lived in. And the end of season 2 was absolutely mind-blowing. And it really made you want a season 3. And Netflix canceled it. And it's such a bummer. It was so original and so different than everything else that is out there. And it's just such a bummer that everything has to be a franchise or has to make $1 billion or else it's not worth doing. Kind of like Firefly, I wish they would do a movie to put a bow on that story because it was such a cool world that they built. Before we get into my top 3, I want to give you a few honorable mentions. And I could go on and on about the honorable mentions. There's so many great TV shows out there, you know? Some of them are great stories, some of them are just great characters that you love to watch. There's just so many good ones. For me, one of them was Battlestar Galactica. Just a really cool reimagining of that old 80s TV show. It didn't land very well. It was a great story, not a great ending. Death Note, the animated version, not the live-action version. Kind of like the OA, just such an original story and such a bizarre world that they built. And it was so compelling, those two characters trying to outsmart each other with literally their lives on the line. It was kind of a bummer of an ending, but I don't know that it could have ended any other way. The Mandalorian. If we made this video a year ago, it would have been on my top 10. But that last season was just not great. And you know, the way that Marvel and Star Wars have been handled the last couple of years, it's really unfortunate. And hopefully Disney figures out what they're doing with all that. Doctor Who. Love it. What a cool concept. What a great story. The thing is, it's 50 years worth of story, and I just don't have the time to commit to that. I've kind of dipped in and out of different seasons, and I've seen a lot of the, you know, really, really great episodes, and it's fantastic. But yeah, it's a major commitment. There's a few Cartoon Network shows, Samurai Jack, Regular Show, Adventure Time. Such good stories, such great characters, and they're very funny and they're really heartfelt. The way that Regular Show ended was just devastating and so surprising. Adventure Time seems like a silly little show, but it's pretty deep. And same thing with Samurai Jack. Such a cool adventure. Just love those. But back to the top 10. Number 3 is Dark. Dark is a German time travel story, and it takes place over several generations. And it is a cool sci-fi story. The way they casted some of these actors, where we see their child self, their adult self, and their elderly self, and the actors they got really look like the same person, was really well done. The first season was absolutely mind-blowing. And then they came out with a second season, which was fantastic. And again, built on this world that was so complicated and so layered. And then they did a season 3, and they landed the plane. They somehow wrapped up this super complicated story that sort of layered back on itself over and over. Dark did things that I've never even imagined other time travel stories doing. And most time travel stories, in my opinion, are just dumb. I could do a whole video just on that, and I probably will. This was one of the smartest bits of sci-fi I've ever seen. It was so captivating, these stories and these people. Just loved it. Number 2, Lost. Lost was just a great show. Great cast, great premise, really, really well done. You know, Lost was probably one of the last great network TV shows before things kind of moved to streaming and all of that. When a season of Lost wrapped up and it would end on a cliffhanger, you had to wait 9 months until the next season to find out what was going on. It was one of those shows that everybody would show up the next day at work and talk about, and it was just really, really cool. You know, it was a fun mix of religion and science, but the best part was just the characters. The characters were so cool. You know, I loved Desmond, loved Jack, loved Locke. They were all just so cool. It was really fun the way they would kind of spend half of the show telling a story and then half of the show flashing back to why we're telling this story. You know, why is this person like this? What happened before we got to the island? The first couple seasons were really character driven and we really got to know those people. The last couple seasons were much more plot driven. Got to be more of a soap opera where we kind of know these people. Let's see what happens with them. And it got wild. And it was super fun. And the people who are like, I don't like the way it ended or I don't understand it, you're just not smart enough to understand it. I said it. Go back and watch it. It all makes sense. There's only one thing that they left out. That's who was in the kayak. And that leaves number one. And my number one favorite TV show is Twin Peaks. As you may have picked up from my favorite movie list, I'm a pretty big David Lynch fan. You know, on the surface, Twin Peaks is just a soap opera. But then they introduced this weird ghosts in the woods kind of aspect, and it's so good. The first season of Twin Peaks was probably one of the best seasons of TV that's ever been done. The whole premise of the show was who killed Laura Palmer, and David Lynch didn't ever want to reveal that mystery, but the network put some pressure, and so at the end of season 1, we got a little bit of an answer. Season 2 got a little bit more goofy, but not bad, just goofier. You know, the Miss Twin Peaks contest and the saving the pine weasel, just bizarre plot elements. And then season 2 ended with this miserable cliffhanger. Dale Cooper and Laura Palmer in the Black Lodge, and she says, I'll see you again in 25 years. And then they canceled it. And then 25 years later, they made a season 3. I had to wait 25 years between seasons. And it was brilliant. It was exactly what it should have been. It wasn't what you wanted it to be, but that's kind of how life goes. And it ended making you want more, and you realizing after all this time, you might not get more. And, you know, that's pretty incredible when you really think about it, you know, where a TV show is not just the characters or the story, but this facet of your life that lingers there where you wonder and you think about it, and 25 years later it comes back and you think about it some more, and in kind of a art imitates life kind of way, you still don't get your closure or your answers, and that leaves a big dent in your world. So anyway, that's my top 10 favorite TV shows. If you've never seen Twin Peaks, you can probably find it on Netflix or Hulu or one of those. Really worth your time. Just make sure you wait 25 years between season 2 and season 3 for the full effect.